Good afternoon. No dance video today. People have asked me several different times why my wife isn't with me, and my wife's passion is horses. And we have a horse ranch. That is my wife that you saw in the video. She is a 3-day adventurer, which includes the cross country. Today we're going to go to the area where I lived, the San Joaquin Valley. A number of years ago, when I first had a ship that was going into Los Angeles, the people in charge of the lectures enrichment said, well, why don't you do a lecture on California for the last lecture? And I think they were thinking I would give a lecture on Hollywood or something like that. And I said, okay. And so I put together a lecture on the San Joaquin Valley, which is a little bit different from where most people think of California. It's the other part of California. San Joaquin Valley is part of the Central Valley of California. It stretches for about 400 miles north-south and about 50 miles east-west. And the San Joaquin Valley is the southern part of that. The northern part is the Sacramento Valley. There's a little bit closer view or a map view of it. Point out where San Francisco and Los Angeles are. And the San Joaquin Valley is the southern half of that, roughly there. And here's an old map. This is about 1871. San Francisco is up there at the top left. And this map was for somebody selling land, 200,000 acres. And the black areas that you see there, dark areas, that was the areas that they were selling on the east side of the San Joaquin Valley. At that point, they could sell very, very large areas. And these were basically railroad lands. The railroads that were built here got land from the U.S. government in exchange for building the railroads, and that was railroad land that they were selling. I also point out there Tulare Lake, a large lake that was in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley, the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River at that time. Here's another map, this one from probably the later 1870s. There's where Fresno is. I live in the general Fresno area, and there are a series of other towns up and down the valley. Visalia a little bit to the south of us, then Tulare. Delano is a small place, but I put that one in because at that point it was the southern limit of a railroad that ultimately went down to Bakersfield at the southern end of the valley. There's Tulare Lake again. The valley is really made by mountain ranges. The mountain range on the east side is the Sierra Nevada, the highest mountains in the United States. Just east of Fresno is Mount Whitney, a little over 14,000 feet high. The Coast Range on the west side is much lower, and it doesn't have snow in this particular image. You don't see the snow caps. It gets the name Sierra Nevada in Spanish. That's basically indicating that it was a snow-covered range. And it is the snow in the Sierra Nevada that makes the San Joaquin Valley what it is. I took this picture out the window of a plane flying east from Fresno, and I took this one off the web because it's better than the one taken out the window. Here's Yosemite Valley. We have several national parks near Fresno. Yosemite, Kings Canyon, and Sequoia National Parks are nearby. That's Yosemite Valley. This is up in Kings Canyon National Park, the General Grant tree, which is the second largest tree in the world. And there's the full tree taken in the wintertime. That snow melts in the spring and into the summer, and that's what provides the irrigation water for agriculture down in the valley. And these are just some pictures I've taken up various times up in the mountains. This is in Kings Canyon National Park. And here's one I took of my kids. My son there, I think was about 7 or 8 years old. He's 49 years old, so it's a while ago. My daughter was, I think, 3 or 4 at the time. Every year, beginning on the 1st of January, 1st of February, March, and April, they do what's called a snow survey. And it's based on those that they know how much water is in the mountains in terms of the snow content, the water content of the snow, that how much irrigation water you might get. This is the snow survey in April of 22. And you might notice up in the mountains there in the background, very, very little snow. The valley has had 23 years of drought, and there wasn't much snow. At our ranch, we have a right to receive irrigation water from the Fresno Irrigation District, and some years we get water for 1 month, and some years we get water for 2 months, and sometimes more or less, depending on how much snow there is up in the mountains. There are a number of rivers that come into the San Joaquin Valley. This one is showing both north and south. That's the Sacramento River in the north, and the main river in the south is the San Joaquin River and its various tributaries. Many of those rivers have dams on them. This is the San Joaquin River, just to the north of Fresno, and Friant Dam was built in the late 1930s and finished in the early 40s. And there's a canal here that I'll be talking about in a moment, the Friant-Kern Canal, which comes off of Friant Dam. This is the Friant Dam, and here's a photo from construction back in 1941. It was built by the Federal Bureau of Reclamation, so this is a federal project. There are a number of major dams. The rivers have dams up and down them. And they're holding back water, again, to be used for irrigation during the late spring and summer. That's Millerton Lake, which is the lake behind Friant Dam. Here, there are a couple of canals, and this is in the San Joaquin Valley. There are other canals to the north of Sacramento, but there are two major canals. On the east side of the valley is the Friant-Kern Canal, and on the west side is the California Aqueduct. California Aqueduct is actually taking water from northern California up at Shasta Dam north of Sacramento and takes it all the way down to the Los Angeles area. So people in Los Angeles, many of them are drinking water that is stolen from Northern California. The Friant-Kern Canal does not get that far south. It goes down to Bakersfield, and it is 152 miles long. I happen to know that canal very, very well because for the last 7 years before I retired in 2011, I was doing a project for 7 years with the Bureau of Reclamation, which involved work along the Friant-Kern Canal. So here's the Friant-Kern Canal just starting out from near the town of Millerton or the Friant Dam, and it's running 152 miles all the way down to Bakersfield. There's the mountains in the background. And here's a little video of the canal. There's foothills there, and on the right-hand side, some orange groves. If you want to stop me sometime and you would like to see more, I have videos of the 152-mile long canal. Literally 6 minutes of video per mile times 152 miles. So you'd have to sit down for roughly 700 hours to be able to see the whole thing. But I have video of the entire length of the canal that we did during that particular project. Here again, that's the Friant-Kern Canal, and notice groves of citrus adjacent to the canal. On the west side, the big aqueduct is the California Aqueduct Canal, and it runs all the way down to Los Angeles. This is a map from 2016, and I want to point out a couple of different things. The brown represents the cities, the urban areas, and you can see them: Modesto, Merced, Fresno, Visalia, Bakersfield, the largest cities. Fresno is the biggest, with the urban area of almost 1 million people now. I had to put in Modesto because somebody was talking to me the other day and said they were from Modesto, so I said I've got to put Modesto in. Merced now has the new UC campus. Again, I did a project that's related to the UC campus being there. And it goes all the way down to Bakersfield. The green, which represents almost 2/3 of the map in 2016, are the agricultural areas. And the blue areas are wetlands, particularly swampy areas. Some of those are federal lands that are set aside as reserves for example, wildlife, particularly birds. It's on the Pacific Flyway, and this big area right there, west of Merced, is very important for the migrating birds. I'm going to describe several different agricultural areas. And right adjacent to the foothills are citrus trees. Lots and lots of citrus trees. Oranges, grapefruits, lemons are the main ones here. And they're adjacent to the foothills for a particular reason. You see it there, or you see the foothills there on the left. The citrus is right close to the foothills. And the reason for that is that citrus are very susceptible to frost. And every year in the San Joaquin Valley, particularly the Fresno area, we'll get down to, with temperatures down to, say, 28 or 27 or 26 degrees Fahrenheit, below freezing. Citrus can stand a little bit of frost for a short period of time without any damage to the fruit. So, say 28 degrees for maybe 4 hours or 27 degrees for 2 or 3 hours, no real big problems. But you still have to protect them. When I first moved to Fresno in 1970, the way in which they typically protected the citrus was by what they called smudge pots. They had burners that would be out in the fields, and they would simply put up smoke, and that little bit of smoke and smudge would raise the temperature a little bit and not have a problem of frost. Before they had smudge pots, they located adjacent to the foothills because air is flowing down, cold air is flowing down to the lowest part of the valley. And just that moving air going past the trees, even if it's 28 or even 27 degrees for a short period of time, that moving air will prevent frost building up on the small oranges, the growing oranges. That's what the orange trees look like. And here you can see it right adjacent to the foothills, but also there in the center of the picture you see a high pole with an airplane propeller on it. And what those are designed to do is get turned on when the temperature gets below freezing, and that propeller is moving air. And again, that moving air is going to keep the trees from getting damaged. You see a whole row of them there. If it goes down to 26, or if it goes down to 27 for like 6 hours, we have a major disaster in the valley because citrus will be damaged and crop will be destroyed. There's our oranges being picked. They're picked obviously manually and taken into a packing plant and run through quality control and sorting and stuff, and then packaged up and sent off to wherever you are. Many of these labels like this are now collector's items. They used to be on the boxes, and people collect these things these days. To the west of the citrus belt, so a little bit farther away from the foothills, up and down the valley, is a zone that we refer to as the stone fruit belt. And these are things like peaches and plums and nectarines and apricots, the fruit with a stone fruit. And they want some cold weather. They need a certain number of hours of temperatures at freezing or just below before they will set fruit. So they have to be a little bit further out. In the springtime, we now have tourists coming to the valley to look at the blossoms. In New England, you have the fall foliage tours. In the San Joaquin Valley, we have the blossom trail for about 3 or 4 weeks in the spring. And depending on the color of the blossoms, these are nectarines or peaches or plums or whatever. But they're very pretty, and again, people are coming for that. It's just like the oranges, the fruit goes into packing plants and gets boxed up and sent off. To the west of the stone fruit belt, heading out more towards the center of the valley, are grapes. And I was flying over the valley in a friend's small plane and took this picture. That's the San Joaquin River there in the background in this particular picture. This one I took on the Fresno State campus, and we're looking off to the foothills. And here's grapes. The typical grape in the San Joaquin Valley, going back to the late 1800s, has been what you see here, a grape called the Thompson seedless. It is the small green grape that has three different purposes. It can be sold for fresh fruit, it can be made into raisins, or it can be made into wine. And I know many of you probably have consumed a lot of San Joaquin Valley in your youth, things like Ripple and Thunderbird. Not the high quality grapes for wine. Here's a photo from 1890. On the east side of the valley, the early irrigation districts had small irrigation canals, and farms were typically in the 10 or 20 acre size up to maybe 100 acres. We had no big farms on the east side of the valley initially. The settlement was in small farms. This caption on this one is a 20-acre farm. It says colony. There were a series of colonies by different ethnic groups. Armenians or Germans or Scandinavians, whatever, came in as groups and set up in a particular area. Here's a photo from mid or early September 9th, with Thompson seedless grapes, and the grapes are being laid out on the ground on paper trays. They used to use wooden trays, but they found that paper was actually better because if there's a threat of rain, you can actually roll these things up and keep the rain from getting on the drying grapes, which then become raisins. The sun actually makes raisins. These people are packing fresh Thompson seedless grapes. But here's a plant where it's taking the raisins from the farmers. It's a cooperative operation. And the raisins are coming in here and running through a big plant. And you may have heard of those raisins, sun-made raisins. That is the sun-made plant in Selma, California, the raisin capital of the world. And we used to have wineries. This is one from 1915. It doesn't exist anymore, but there have always been wines being made in the Fresno area. There's some very big operations not too far from us. Some company called Gallo, but they have big tanks. These are not 100-gallon tanks or whatever. These are like 10,000-gallon tanks of stuff, and it's the cheap wine that then gets mixed into other things. And incidentally, there are good wines now coming out from the San Joaquin Valley, but they're usually small farmers that have put in 4 or 5 acres and are tending them, taking care of them. West of the grapes, on the west side of the valley, is what we call the west side. And the west side was not much in the way of agriculture up until the big projects like the California Aqueduct were built. In the old days, back before the California Aqueduct, the west side was basically dry farmed. So things like wheat or oats, things that you could raise based on the spring rains, winter rains, and get away with it. This is probably from the late 1800s or very early 1900s. Here, a steam tractor. I'm not sure if there was a date on this one. Notice it says Tulare Lake. By this time, Tulare Lake was being drained. And there was a company called Harris Farms. You see the name Harris there on that one, at Harvester. This is probably from the maybe 1920 or so, based on that truck there on the left. By that time, the Harrises were draining parts of Tulare Lake and turning it into agriculture. Here again, this one, 1910. Big-scale agriculture on the west side, but typically dry farmed. Once irrigation came in on the west side, and some of this was based on drilling wells and pumping water out, and then with the California Aqueduct, there was more irrigation water available. The crops became basically what we call row crops. And the typical row crop on the west side was this one, cotton. And that's what a field of cotton looks like, about ready to be harvested. This is in 1940 harvest. Some of these pictures are undated, but it's probably from the 30s or 40s, harvesting cotton by hand. There are a whole series of pictures. You may have seen some of these, like this. They're very famous ones. Life magazine sent somebody out and took a lot of pictures out there. Or you may have read the book, The Grapes of Wrath, by John Steinbeck, very famous author, that was talking about the migration of people from the Dust Bowl in the 1930s out to California, the land of milk and honey. Again, this one says Boswell. Boswells were another family that started planting and having their farms out in the Tulare Lake Basin area. This one from 1940. Beginning right around the Second World War, and particularly right afterwards, there was a shortage of labor during the Second World War, so they began to mechanize harvesting of cotton in the valley. And so you see things like this, or like this. This is a guy named Larry Turnquist that was a friend of mine. We were out with him one day. He had a relatively small farm on the west side, only 10,000 acres. Some of the bigger farms, like the Harrises and the Boswells, were up in the 25 or 30,000 acre range. And that's one of Larry's pickers. And here they were dumping the picker into a bin. Notice the guy that's standing up there. There he is, kind of unique. He was a Sikh. And Sikhs came into the valley to be agriculturalists, and now are into other things like truck driving. A lot of them are. But the valley has always attracted migrant labor, people coming in for a better life, going back to Armenians and to a certain extent blacks, and then Mexicans and Chinese and Japanese. Always got a lot of immigrants that have come into the valley. There's the cotton being dumped into a cotton press, and then it would be taken into a gin where it would be turned into good clean cotton. Or here, this is the Helm Gin on the west side of Fresno County, closed. Basically, in the southern San Joaquin Valley, I don't know of any gins that are still operating. Cotton has disappeared. Anybody recognize what this machine is doing? Anybody want to guess? I see no hands being raised. It is a very major crop there, coming off of that machine into a big truck. Garlic, I heard somebody say garlic. You may know garlic is supposedly over in Gilroy. Gilroy is the garlic capital of the world, but Gilroy is at the south end, the far, far south end of the greater San Francisco Bay Area, and Gilroy has gone suburban, and therefore the leading county in the United States for garlic is Fresno County, where these pictures were taken. Or here, this machine is harvesting tomatoes. It may not be the way you pick tomatoes in your backyard from your home garden, but these are not tomatoes to be sold and sent to market. These are processing tomatoes for things like spaghetti sauce, things like that. There's a big plant near Firebaugh on the west side of the valley. There's the tomato processing plant. Or here, this is an old picture of a sugar beet factory near Visalia in 1912. And this one is the Spreckles sugar plant, making sugar out of sugar beets. That's the Spreckles plant. Or here. And again, it's closed. Row crops like sugar beets and cotton have pretty much disappeared in the last 2 decades or so. So the big plants like cotton gins and the sugar plant here have gone away. One other thing that hasn't changed much on the west side is cattle. This is a couple photos I've taken of the Harris Ranch, Harris Beef Company. Which actually, the Harrises no longer own it. They've sold out. But on any given day, there might be as many 200,000 cattle on here. Big operation, stretches over a square mile, like 800 acres. Huge, huge operation. Harris Ranch, Harris Farms. Harris himself, actually now, John Harris is more famous that a few years ago, one of the horses raised on his ranch. He no longer owned it, but no longer owned the thing, but he had raised the thing, had been born there, was a Triple Crown winner. Valley has always had dairy. When I first went to Fresno in 1970, just after that, I think of 71 or 72, I took this picture of the Rao Dairy, which was the largest dairy in Fresno County at that time with 300 head of cows. Biggest dairy in Fresno County. Today in Fresno or Tulare County in particular, a small dairy will have 3,000 cows. They literally milk 24 hours a day. They milk on big merry-go-rounds, carousels. Cow walks onto a carousel, it slowly rotates and it gets back to where it started and it walks off and another cow is going to that slot. It's all mechanized and literally every 12 hours that cow is riding the carousel around and they're milking 24 hours a day. Huge operations. There are attendant problems. Big dairies are also big centers of smell and waste of both solid and liquid, and it's a big problem in terms of air pollution, things like that, but large-scale operations. And most of it is going into Hanford, California, or Tulare, California, where there are several big plants. Land O'Lakes here is one of them. And in several places, making cheeses or sending the milk down to the Los Angeles basin. The southern part of the valley consists of 4 counties, or 5 counties: Madera County, Fresno, Kings, Tulare, and Kern. 4 of those counties, Fresno, Tulare, Kings, and Kern, are usually listed as 4 of the 5 top counties in the United States for total production, dollar production. Sometimes a county from Texas will sneak into the top 5 list. But almost always it's either Fresno or Tulare County that are the #1 county in the United States for agricultural production in terms of dollar value. I do have to tell you that that's kind of a misleading statistic because these are big counties. Fresno County itself is almost the size of the state of Connecticut. So these are big counties. I found some statistics a year or two ago. I arrived in Fresno in 1970, and I found the statistics for 2000 and 1970. There was an article comparing the 2 years. So we'll look at the top 10 crops in 2000. Almonds were the #1 crop in 2020. Notice the number of acres. The acreage had gone up by something like 40 times over the years, and had gone from $4 million in 70 to well over $1 billion in 2000. Grapes in 2020 were the second important crop at a little over $1 billion. The acreage wasn't much different, but the value was up because over the 50 years, the price of grapes and the value of grapes had gone up. Pistachios were almost nothing back in 1970, but had become a major crop. Take almonds and pistachios together, 2 nut crops, about $2 billion a year for the 2 of them. Garlic, which I said had migrated over from the Gilroy in the coastal area south of San Francisco, had increased the number of acres by almost 10 times, but the value had gone up by about 150 times. Tomatoes, this is mainly processing tomatoes. Oranges, the acreage had gone up by about 2.5 times, but the value had gone up by about 40 times. Peaches gone up. Mandarins were not even reported as a separate item back in 1970, but had gone up to 24,000 acres. Oranges and mandarins together, the citrus that are on the east side of the valley, but you'd also have to add in lemons and grapefruit, but well over $500 million of citrus in Fresno County alone. Plums, another stone fruit, peaches and plums as the stone fruits. Other leading crops from 1970, like cotton, alfalfa, barley, those things that were grown on the west side of the valley back in 1970 had totally disappeared from the list. Basically, there isn't much cotton being grown, very little of alfalfa and barley anymore. In fact, for our horse ranch, we feed alfalfa, and it comes in from Nevada. The Fresno Bee just released things, actually just before I got on the ship, so probably 2 weeks ago. They had an article with the 2022 Fresno County crop report, and for 2022, grapes were ahead of almonds, whereas in 2020, almonds were ahead of grapes. It's just a matter of what are the price of that crop in that particular year. It's not that they have more acreage of one or the other in just a 1 or 2 year period. It's just what the value of the crop prices have gone up or down for almonds or grapes. Also in an article, literally since I've gotten on the ship, Fresno Bee reported that Tulare County beat out Fresno County. 2021 and 2020, Fresno was the #1 county in the country. But 2022, Tulare County beat us out, mainly because milk prices were high. They have more dairies, and therefore they got a little bit more money from their milk. One new thing in the valley is illustrated here, and it was on our list, but very pretty one. It's also part of the annual Spring Blossom Trail. Very, very pretty. You see the mountains there in the background. Anybody recognize the crop? Cherries? No. Walnuts? No. That's actually in Tulare County. We don't have much walnuts here in Fresno County. I actually took these as I drive between our ranch and our home, which is a 7-mile drive every day. I took these in the last about 4 or 5 weeks ago, or a little earlier than that. This is in the spring. The boxes kind of give it away. This is a crop that literally depends on those boxes. Those boxes are bees, and these are almonds. To get a nut, you have to have it pollinated by a bee, so you literally bring in bees from Montana, as far away from Montana. They bring in bees during the 3 or 4 weeks of the blossom time for the almonds. We now even have bee rustlers in the Fresno area. At night, people will go out and take away these bees. They're very, very valuable. Unfortunately, bees have a virus, I think, that is killing them, and the bee population in the United States has been going down fairly sharply, and so the farmers have to pay more and more every year to get bees to come in and pollinate and get their nuts. That's what the almonds look like just as they're about to be ready to harvest it, or here they start to dry out, they stop irrigating, they dry out a little bit, and they're ready for harvest. Incidentally, each one of those nuts, every almond, takes a gallon of water. It is a very highly water-intensive crop. Big advantages for almonds over anything else is the labor costs. You need somebody to go around on a maybe weekly basis to make sure your irrigation is working right, but it's basically automated these days. And harvesting is done mechanically. A big machine comes in and shakes the tree, and the nuts fall to the ground, and then another machine comes in and sweeps them up. Or some of the machines actually have pans that go around the base of the tree. The nuts are shaken down into the tree, and you pick them up, scoop them up that way. This is a machine that is picking up the nuts. One of the big problems, as far as I'm concerned, is that you get a tremendous amount of dust into the air from the shaking of the trees, and particularly from blowing and sweeping out in the almond trees. They're then loaded onto trailers like this and taken off to a nearby processing plant. And there's lots of different processing plants up and down the valley. This is about a mile away from our ranch, and I drive past this one every day. It's the Sanger facility. And it's a big operation for about 6 weeks. When I left, we were about halfway through the almond processing picking period. By the time I get home, it should be gone. And then after they've been cleaned up a little bit, they're out there. Most of this, what you're seeing here, are not really almonds. Some of them piles might be almonds. Most of them are the almond hulls that have been knocked off. And the almond hulls are ground up and fed to cattle. Cattle with multiple stomachs can actually digest the almond hulls. But this piles here were just about a half mile from our ranch. It's a big field that now is nothing more than piles of almond hulls. And the almonds themselves are bagged up. And there's our almonds ready to sell. And where are they sold? About 2/3 are exported. The United States market is growing a little bit, but a lot of it is being exported. Where? Canada, Europe, and China. Think about it. It's a water-intensive crop. We're growing more and more and more. We are exporting our water. We're running out of water, but we're sending it away. When I say we're running out of water, this is a map for the 23 years up to this last year. There was a big drought, and if you look over here on the right, that's the main almond growing area. The darker the color, the more almonds, and the drought area and the almond areas are almost the same. Now remember back, I showed you this slide earlier, April 22, there was almost no water. We were in a big drought, the last year of a 23-year drought. And it looked like that up in the hills, or here's some of the reservoirs. Were almost empty. And so what did they have to do? Trees need water almost every day, certainly every week. If you had cotton, if you were planting cotton, and you found out there was going to be no water in the mountains this year, you don't plant. And the federal government gives you money for not planting. You had crop insurance. With trees, you have to have water, but if you don't have water, the trees die, and you end up having to pull them out. There's subsidence in the valley. The mark up there is where the ground was in 1988, and here is where the ground is 28 years later. The ground is literally dropping. As people are pumping the water out, the ground is collapsing. There on the right, the level of ground in 2018, and up there where it was in 1988. This other one over here is an old picture from 1925. That was the level, and here is what it was in 1977. Some places the ground has dropped 25 or 30 feet. You're in a valley with irrigation. Water does not like to run uphill or ground have collapsing. Many of the canals don't work anymore because the ground has collapsed and the water can't get where it needs to go. Big project, one of the reasons I was doing the project I did on the Frying Kern Canal had to do with reconstructing parts of the canal. So here's March of 2023. We saw what it was 2022. 23, from October 1st of 22 to end of September of 23. It was the second snowiest record in 75 years. So we had lots of water. We had water at our ranch all summer. Just before I left, we were still being able to use irrigation water. Before Europeans or whites were on the east side of the valley, see, pre-1800, this is what the valley looked like. Don't worry about the maps and the roads and things like that, because obviously they weren't there. But colors. The darker blue is where the lakes were. There was a big lake up at Tulare Lake, and there were a couple of lakes down near Bakersfield. The lighter gray here is, this greenish gray, is basically wetlands, swamplands, and things like that. The whole center of the valley was a wet zone. There were some riparian areas of oak forest. They were up near Visalia and Hanford. That color there is riparian areas. The brown, gold brown, and the lighter tan are areas that were natural vegetation like grasslands or saltbrush that were not really good agricultural areas. Here's 1912. The green up near the top up there by Visalia and Hanford and scattered other locations down by Bakersfield, those were agricultural areas, but it's prior to the big canals, Frying Kern Canal or the California Aqueduct. We still have Tulare Lake there. 2020, the green is agriculture. By 2020, most of the valley is agricultural. Notice that we don't have Tulare Lake, which used to be there, but by 2000, actually by the 1940s and 50s, Tulare Lake was agricultural land. And here's 2023. Amazingly enough, in 2023, we have Tulare Lake again. Here's one I took off the television, and that flooded area, that's Tulare Lake. And so here's Tulare Lake. It always was very, very shallow. It was not a deep lake, but it's always a big, big lake. That's the city of Corcoran in the far upper right corner. And when you have something like this, who gets involved first? The politicians. And the farmers, particularly the big farmers that had their farms out there in Tulare Lake, want either the federal government or the state government to build more dams, only multi-billion-dollar projects, do something. Well, you can't get rid of the water that easily. One last thing, I've got just a couple of minutes. One more crop that's new to the valley in the last, really about the last 20 years. Anybody know what this might be? What? Pot? No, that's up in the foothills. I sell compost to some of those people. Anybody recognize what it might be? Cherries? No. Peaches? No. Olives? No. You have to understand, why are those things covered? Protect from birds, which cherries would protecting from birds, but no, it's something else. Not pistachios. No. There it is without the protection. And they're citrus, but a very special kind of citrus. Mandarins. You may have seen on that chart, mandarins were not a crop listed separately in 1970, but they were a big crop in 2020. Those covering on there is to keep the bees out. The almond farmers want the bees. The mandarin farmers do not want the bees, because if the plant, the blossom, is pollinated, then you get a seeded mandarin. And they want these to be seedless, so you keep the bees away from them. And you have a couple of different major brands in the United States that have developed this process and are selling these things. This is a company, wonderful company, a man by the name of Stuart Resnick, probably the richest guy in California that's not living in Silicon Valley. He's out of Los Angeles area. And there's another brand that's big called the Cuties. And they're selling these based on they're easy to peel, they're seedless, and they're very, very sweet. They've developed some special varieties. Unfortunately, these take a lot of water, just like the almonds do. And if you're in a drought, the last thing you want is a tree that has to get water every week or so. And the valley has gotten lots and lots of these trees, particularly on the west side, which is always the dry part of the valley. So I hate these things. If you're interested in learning more, there's a wonderful book that was published about 3 or 4 years ago by a Fresno author, Mark Arax. It's called The Dreamt Land, and it talks about the change in the valley from the agriculture back the early part of the 20th century up to the arrival of Stuart Resnick and his big corporation and what they're doing to the valley these days. So that's a good book if you're looking for something when you get home to read. It's a wonderful book on the valley. I want to give my thanks to the theater staff here. They've always done a wonderful job, made it easy for me. And I hope you have a safe trip home, and maybe see you on another cruise. The next time I'm on Oceania, I think, is in March and April. I'm on Marina again. I've been on Marina about 15 times, and Rio de Janeiro to Miami, up the Amazon, and then on to Miami. And I'll be on Marina again in October, I think, of next year. So hopefully see you then. Thanks a lot.